Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and today we're going to take a look at a Game Week 9 wildcard draft. So hopefully those of you guys who have been saving your wildcard up till now will find this video useful. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of wildcarding in Game Week 9 and of course take a look at the draft later on as well. So if you guys do enjoy this one, please give it a like and also subscribe as well if you are new around here. So before we jump into this graphic here on the screen, I do want to mention that if you are set on a wildcard for Game Week 9, the international break is quite long, so make sure that you activate your wildcard early and bring in those players that are going to rise in price very soon. Now this is because you don't want to be priced out of these players when they rise in price and essentially your team value isn't able to afford them anymore. So price rises this season have been a lot more aggressive, and it is more common to see players rise or fall by 0.2 million within the same game week, right? So price rises and falls are quite brutal this season, so make sure that you activate your wildcard early if you are set on doing so. So let's jump into this graphic here and talk about the pros and cons of wildcarding now in Game Week 9. Now, of course, one of the major advantages, as you guys who have been saving your wildcard for now, right, know that this is post-international break. The Game Week 9 deadline would be after the international break. We can reassess whether players get injured, etc. And, of course, deal with the injuries that we currently have now. In Game Week 8, right, the previous game week, we saw so many players get injured. Players like Estupinian, players like Botman haven't returned as well. So you can deal with those players. And then, of course, you can deal with those off-form players right now, namely Manchester United as well as Brentford assets like Mbeumo as well. You can deal with all these players if you've lost your patience with them and you feel like moving forward, they're just not worth keeping. You can kind of address them on a wild card. And of course, you can sell your Chelsea assets. Now, this may sound a bit crazy because they did just score 4 goals against Burnley, and Raheem Sterling did really well in that game. Even Jackson got a return. But the thing is, they're not going to play Burnley every game week, that's one. And the second thing is they're really inconsistent, right? Chelsea have been putting in decent performances against some sides, and then after that, they go on streaks where they can't get a win or can't even get a draw against teams that you would expect them to do so, right? So lastly, they do have a bad fixture swing, right? From Game Week 9 onwards, they're going to play Arsenal. A couple of weeks later, they're going to play Spurs as well. This is just the right time to sell Chelsea assets. So even though they just returned quite heavily in Game Week 8, I do think that this is a good opportunity to use your wildcard to sell those Chelsea assets as well. Now, let's talk about the disadvantages of wildcarding in Game Week 9. Now, firstly, it is not the most ideal time to wildcard fixtures-wise, and the reason I say this is because a wildcard in Game Week 9 versus a wildcard in Game Week 10 would at least have 3 to 4 players different. Now, this is because, as you can see in the next point here, you are 1 week too early for Arsenal and Brighton assets. So Arsenal will play Chelsea in Game Week 9. Brighton will play Manchester City in Game Week 9 as well. So these aren't great fixtures, but Arsenal and Brighton are players that you will want from Game Week 10 onwards because their fixtures swing into a really good run from there on. So unfortunately, because you are wildcarding in Game Week 9, you will have to prepare your team for those good fixtures for Arsenal and Brighton, and that just basically means that you have to bring them in now and deal with their bad fixtures now in Game Week 9. So in that sense, you're kind of 1 week early, and therefore it's just not ideal fixtures wise. And in terms of the players that you would be removing to bring in the players that you want, you are likely going to remove players like Bruno Fernandes, players like Marcus Rashford who play Sheffield United, right? So that's also one compromise you're making. And if you do have Mbeumo as well, he does have Burnley who just conceded 4 goals against Chelsea as well. So do consider how many players with good fixtures you are removing and whether it is worth it to delay your wildcard in Game Week 9 to use it in Game Week 10. Now the thing is, if I were to compare a Game Week 9 versus a Game Week 10 wildcard, I feel like it would be more ideal to use it in Game Week 10. But I know that said, a lot of us, looking at our teams, you may have quite a couple of flags. You may have players that you don't feel you want in your team right now, and you may feel like a wildcard is the best decision for you. It is very team dependent, right? So do make your own considerations. But in general, I would say that I feel if you are able to delay a wildcard until Game Week 10, then do so. Right, but let's now take a look at a Game Week 9 wildcard. I've tried to put together a draft that will be able to cover all the good fixtures moving forward as well, because if you're wildcarding now, this team will have to take you through quite a number of game weeks, potentially up till, Game Week 23, 24 as well. So let's take a look at the draft. So here is the Game Week 9 wildcard draft that I've put together. This is an early draft and I will update it as we go along during the international break as well. So do subscribe if you do want to check out the updated draft later on. Alright, so the team value for this particular draft is 100.6 million. Right, so I know team value this season is quite drastic in terms of some FPL managers having close to 103 million. Right, and that's so much team value accumulated over the first couple of game weeks. And then I see there are a couple of managers with less than 100 million in team value as well. So we have a really widespread players with different team values. But I would say that this particular draft, 100.6 million, it should be affordable for the vast majority of you guys. If you aren't able to afford some players, of course, do downgrade some of them. The formation will be a 3-5-2. We're going to stick with this 3-5-2 formation because I feel like it's the most flexible moving forward as well. Alright, so let's jump into this draft and discuss the players. So Turner and Areola will be the keeper pairing. Now I see no reason why we should deviate from this. Turner just kept a clean sheet against Crystal Palace in game week 8 as well. So he's really just the best value keeper at 4.0 million, and he rotates quite well with Areola as well, who's on the bench because he plays Aston Villa away. But you can be sure that from game week 10 onwards, you will be starting Areola ahead of Turner. Right, so that will be the keepers. As for the defenders, it's not too different from the Game Week 8 wildcard defenders, and that's Dan Burn, Pedro Porro, and Matty Cash. Now, the other two defenders on the bench are Saliba and Charlie Taylor, so I'll talk about them later on. But focusing on the three defenders on the field right now, Dan Burn, of course, it is to capture those Newcastle fixtures who look really solid in defense. As for Pedro Porro, Tottenham do have a good fixture in Game Week 9 against Fulham at home, and they do have Crystal Palace in Game Week 10 as well. In general, I feel like Pedro Porro is taking up really good positions, much better positions than Udogie, and he's a lot more attacking as well. So if I were to choose a Tottenham defender of choice right now, it would be Pedro Porro ahead of Udogie. And then we have Matty Cash as the third defender here. Now, Matty Cash, of course, he's a really attacking player that we know if he does keep a clean sheet in the next couple of games from Game Week 10 onwards, because now he plays West Ham at home, that's not the easiest fixture. But from Game Week 10, he will have easy fixtures, starting with Luton Town. Right, so I definitely think that's a game that you could see Matty Cash haul there, get some attacking returns, get some clean sheets, and that should be the theme moving forward because Aston Villa do have a very, very good run from Game Week 10 onwards. So he will be there in this draft. Now, the two defenders on the bench, I've gone with Saliba and Charlie Taylor. Now, Charlie Taylor is just 3.9 million. It's a good bench fodder to have if we do need him to come on. Burnley's fixtures aren't the worst moving forward as well, so it's good to just have an option there. As for Saliba, he is slightly more expensive, 5.2 million, but as I mentioned, we're going to have to roll with some Arsenal players or Brighton players. I haven't gone with any Brighton players here because the plan for this draft is to bring Brighton players from Game Week 10 onwards. So I've gone with Saliba here to just make sure we take advantage of Arsenal's good fixtures from Game Week 10 onwards. Saliba will come into the team once Game Week 10 comes around. And then, of course, in the midfield, we have Saka that I'll talk about later on, right? But Saliba is just a player that we're going to have here on the bench, and he'll start from Game Week 10 onwards. Now, let's talk about the midfielders. Now, Bowen, Salah, Saka, Maddison, and Diaby is the midfield I've gone with. It's a very, very strong midfield. So starting with Salah, of course, we have to have him if he's the most nailed Liverpool attacker that's guaranteed to play 90 minutes every game. He's on penalties, and Liverpool's fixtures are just so good right now that you just have to have a player like Mohamed Salah in your team. Right? So for me, he is actually non-negotiable on a wild card. Right? And then the next most expensive player is already Bukayo Saka. Right? So Saka, of course, as I mentioned, is just to take advantage of Arsenal's fixtures, but Saka against Chelsea, I do feel like that is definitely a fixture that you could see Chelsea conceding against Arsenal, and you would expect Saka to be at the forefront of that. Of course, there are a lot of injury concerns surrounding Saka, where every other week it seems as if he's a doubt, but then he ends up starting as well. So I do feel like the international break will come at a good time for him. Hopefully he isn't as involved in the England games where he gets more rest, and then he can come back to the Premier League from game week 9 onwards fresh. But we just have to have him because come game week 9 he has Chelsea, game week 10 onwards the fixtures swing. So you will want Saka in your team already, right? Saves you a transfer later on as well. Now the next most expensive player will be James Maddison. James Maddison is 8 million right now, but of course we just do have to have him for this Fulham at home fixture. Later on, further down the line, maybe after Crystal Palace in game week 10, right? Spurs play Crystal Palace in game week 10, but after that, you can potentially consider selling Maddison for maybe someone like Mitoma to take advantage of Brighton's fixtures, right? So that's Maddison, and then we have Jarrod Bowen. Now, Jarrod Bowen is there because he is just simply a really good asset from West Ham. Now, of course, he's the player that has been so bright for West Ham in the first couple of game weeks. We see him popping up with really clinical finishes. And, you know, you will remember a couple of seasons ago where Bowen was just his player that was able to score so many goals, right? So he does have it in him, and I think he is finding some of that form back as well. So for the run-in, I think it looks really good. Jarrod Bowen's fixtures coupled with his form, I definitely think he's a player you want to have as well. And then you have Musa Diaby, just to make sure that you do have an Aston Villa attacker for those good run of fixtures from game week 10 onwards. So now he has West Ham. From game week 10, he'll have Luton, and it's a sea of green fixtures after that. Now, the main player that you will realize is missing, right, is Ollie Watkins up front. I've chosen to go with Haaland and Alvarez instead of Haaland and Watkins. Now, this is, of course, because of team value, right? If I had maybe 1 million more, maybe I go for Ollie Watkins with better fixtures. But I also do feel like Alvarez is someone that will just continue to tick along, right? There's no saying that Alvarez can't match Ollie Watkins over the next couple of game weeks. So if you are happy enough with Diaby covering the Aston Villa attack, then Alvarez I don't feel is a bad alternative at all. In fact, I know some players actually, some FPL managers actually prioritize having Alvarez in your team. There is some talk about him potentially being somewhat of a season keeper because of the value that he just allows you to have at 7 million. So it's really cheap, plays for an attack that you would know definitely scores every single game week as well, right? So there we go with Alvarez here, and Haaland, I think we're just gonna have him. There was some consideration about going with a no Haaland draft in game week 8, but I think the time now has passed, because if you're now in game week 9, he no longer plays Arsenal. It's Brighton here, it's Manchester United next. Looking at the way these both teams are defending, you'd actually think Haaland may actually score in those games. And then there's Bournemouth as well. So I think game week 9 is not a game week to consider going without Haaland, right? So there we go with the two strikers up front, and on the bench, the only player that I haven't mentioned is Mubama. Now, the thing with Mubama is he's 4.3 million, so he's the cheapest forward, but he is from West Ham. So if you'll realize here, Areola, Bowen, and Mubama is already a triple up on West Ham. Now, I've had Mubama here only because of team value, but if you are able to afford Archer, do go for Archer because he is playing 4.5 million forward, and then having Archer instead of Mubama frees up that third West Ham spot in case you want to go for maybe someone like a Soufal in defense or even a James Ward-Prowse in midfield. It keeps your options open because West Ham's fixtures are really good and their form is good as well, so you may potentially want to triple up on them later on. So you won't lock yourself out of those possibilities moving forward if you go from Mubama to Archer if you have the money. Right, so there we go with this Game Week 9 wildcard draft. Let me know what you think. What changes would you make to this draft? And if you're on a wildcard, do let me know down below how your team currently looks like as well. But for now, thank you guys for watching. I hope this video was useful for you. Do remember to activate your wildcard early if you are on a Game Week 9 wildcard. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching to this point, and I hope to catch you in more Game Week 9 content over the international break coming very soon. Bye-bye.